Okay, I might start sounding like a broken record, but I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. So the legislative branch, they play the central role of creating the laws that form the foundation from which the regulations are drafted. So the legislature is going to go through the legislative process that we learned about, the bill, the readings, the votes, the sending for signature, to really create the framework of comprehensive laws, from which the regulations spring. I put some examples of some key transportation laws that the California legislature has passed over the years. The first one is the Clean Air Act, passed in 1988. This regulates air pollution, specifically air pollution from vehicles. And it required that the state of California would develop plans for reducing vehicle emissions. You know, in the 70s and 80s, smog in LA was just ridiculous. I mean, it was a combination of it being very much a driving city, of poor gasoline and fuel emissions and fuel efficiency standards, and just the topography, the geography of California, of LA, led to really intense smog problems. There are very famous pictures where you can barely see through the air. And so, to address this, they passed the Clean Air Act, and that really regulated the level of emissions from cars, and it directed the state to come up with a plan to reduce it. The Senate Bill 1 from 2017. This is Senate Bill 1, but it's known as the Road Repair and Accountability Act. So this increased fuel taxes and vehicle fees to fund a lot of transportation infrastructure repairs, right? So again, really comprehensive framework to raise money and deploy for transportation projects. And then the High Speed Rail Act. So this was in 2008, and the legislature approved a plan to develop a high speed rail system across the state of California to reduce congestion and emissions, take people out of internal combustion engine vehicles and place them into mass transit. So these are examples of transportation laws that the California legislature would pass. This is an example of the initiatives that they would do. So once they pass the law, they will often delegate their powers to a state agency to implement that law. So, for example, we talked about CARB, the California Air Resource Board. The legislature delegated to them power to regulate vehicle emissions, right? So this is important. So the legislature set the framework, but the agencies we talked about at the federal level, it's the same at the state level. These agencies have a lot of expertise, right? These legislators, they have various backgrounds. Their job is to represent the people, to think what the state should do and set those priorities, but they sometimes don't have like the technical expertise to write the regulations. So it's not really, they pass that off to agencies, and agencies typically have a lot of experts. They have engineers. They have urban planning specialists. So they have the know-how to write really specific technical regulations, and so it just makes sense for a lot of reasons, but it makes sense from a technical reason to pass this off to the people that can write really specific rules and regulations that we may need to enforce these laws. So as I mentioned, they delegate this authority to the agencies, but it doesn't stop there. They don't say good luck with that. They maintain a lot of oversight of the agencies to make sure they're acting in accordance with what the law was supposed to be. Again, the governor selects the head of these agencies, and controls them, but the legislative, they keep an eye, and they still have, while they cannot direct the agencies the way the governor can, they still have a few manners of oversight. So one is hearings. We have a picture here of a hearing in the California legislature. So they can bring in members of agencies, the heads of agencies, to question them. Sometimes these are antagonistic. Sometimes they're just informational. How's it going? What are you doing out there? Are you meeting your target requirements? For example, with emissions, give us an update on how things are. Or they can be combative right? This not so much in California, but in states where perhaps the executive, the governor, is of one political party and the legislature is controlled by a different political party, and now their priorities may not be in line. You might get a little bit of a combative hearing about what are you doing over there, why are you doing it this way, and just it's informational, but sometimes it's a little bit of an intimidation, or making their lives a little bit harder for political purposes. But whichever reason it is, the legislative branch does have the authority to require the executive leaders to come to hearings and give them information over how these laws are being implemented, how these laws are being executed. So not direct control, but that's still a form of oversight. If they don't like what the agency's doing, Congress can pass another law, right? Congress can do that. They can change the law if they don't like the way it's being implemented and remove the power of that agency to implement it that way. But that's a lot, right? That we talked about how laws are passed. That's a lot of effort, and you have to have everyone on board, and that might not be the case. So an easier way to put control on to try and control these agencies is through budget control. The legislature gets to set the budget for the entire state government, and so if they really don't like what an agency's doing, they can remove that agency's budget for that particular project. Or if they really want to incentivize the agency to do something, maybe they give it more money for that budget. So the legislature controls the budget of these agencies, and so they can influence priorities like highway maintenance. They can give them money or take away money, emissions testing, public transit. These regulations can't go anywhere if they're not properly funded. So legislature maintains control there. So in some, they delegate, in summary, they do delegate authority to these agencies that are controlled directly by the executive, by the governor, but they still maintain some ability to either influence or directly control the activities of these agencies. So let's talk a little bit about how the legislative and executive branch really interact. There's two sides to this. The structure in the actual day-to-day practice, it's intended to be collaborative, right? They have to work with each other. The legislature passes the laws, and the executive branch enforces them. They really need to be on the same page for government to function. So for an example, in the transportation world, the legislature passed that Senate Bill 1, really raising money and implementing new taxes to fund infrastructure. But then Caltrans and local governments work together to identify where should that money, what kind of project should we do? Where should that money go? And so, they kind of work together to get that done. At the same time, there are a lot of checks and balances that are built into the system. So again, the legislature passes laws, but we need an executive branch that is really accountable to itself, voted directly by the people to implement it. So if the legislature passes something the executive branch doesn't agree with, they can find ways to thwart or inhibit or change the law slightly in the way that they implement it. But then again, as we said, the legislature still retains oversight, so they can come back and they can bring them in for hearings to put pressure on them. They can alter the budget to defund them as a punishment, or give them more money as a way to incentivize them. So really, they're collaborative, but they really do keep checks and balances on each other. And then finally, participation. Both branches really do want to involve the public. You don't want to do something and then find out people don't like what you did. So the more input you can get, although it's tedious and can be time consuming, having worked in the public sector, you have to have a thick skin, because it doesn't matter what you do. There's someone out there that's not going to like it. But these public feedback mechanisms that are built into the rulemaking process, or implied or implicitly from the voting process, right, can be really important to this entire exchange. So yeah, it's really important to bring that in. So with that, we have concluded our over generalized discussion of what does it look like from the state level to create these regulations. So it looks a little bit like the federal process, but hopefully put some names and faces to the executive branch and to the legislative branch to see how they work together and like actually what do some of these laws look like? What do some of these regulations say? So now let's go in deeper. Let's look at these state agencies. Let's name them. Let's see what they're actually doing, and look at the rulemaking process so we can understand it better.